Brandy Green, the head women's coach at Limestone University. Back in the day, 2002, you were Brandy Rosenbrock, and you were part of that first group that won the very first junior women's national championships here. 20 years ago, there were 103 entries. This year, 946. As one of those pioneers of this age group in this tournament, what's that make you feel like?
I mean, it gives you goosebumps. Like the idea of the growth that we've had. I mean, it's not even just the growth, but it's the depth and the caliber that we're also seeing right now as well. Is really, really exciting. But it's goosebumps. It gives you chills to know that we're seeing what we're seeing right now with these women.
When you look at that group, I mean, Melinda's here coaching, you're here coaching. And, you know, this is not a thing that's just for the men anymore. Like, yeah, I wrestled here, now I get to coach here. You wrestled here, you won here, now you're coaching here, and you've been doing it for a number of years. What's it like to give back to the women's wrestling community in such a manner?
I mean, I couldn't think of doing anything else. I think that our women deserve the technique and the accountability and the intensity that they deserve. And so that's what I continue to try to give back to the young ladies that I work with. And they want that, and they love those feelings. And I give them that little twist of like what it is with the female side of it. You know, the things that we offer sometimes as females are a little more compassion and things like that. So it's very exciting for it to come back around and now be on the mat, coaching that side, and seeing what they can do now as well.
Go back in time to the opportunity to wrestle here. What was going in your mind? You're like, oh, we get to wrestle in Fargo finally. What was that thought process going into the tournament that year?
Well, I mean, we'd already been around like what the guys have done for so many years. I mean, that's a few years into my wrestling career, and the guys had always talked about the experience that you got, and it was like no other, and you know what it looks like to have 25 mats and the flashy lights and all that stuff. So of course you want that opportunity. So I had already competed on big stages before, but big stages are nothing like what you experience here. So I would say like the modern day comparison is like when they were like Super 32 is going to be a women's division and they're doing freestyle. I would say like that's the comparison of what these young ladies can feel now that we felt back then, is just having the opportunity to be on the stage. And it was one of the first tournaments I think I attended where it felt just as equal with what the men were doing as what the women were doing. It felt like we were all together on the same mission, opposed to a mat in the corner or something like that, which is what we were used to.
2002, there were maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 women's college programs at the time. As of last week, we should be about over 120.
Yes.
And that developmental pipeline, the Olympic pipeline, the World Championship pipeline, comes through these mats. So how important has this tournament been to the growth of college wrestling?
I think it makes it really easy to be able to promote the sport to institutions when you have events like this. It's easy to say, hey, we have 1,500 girls that are competing at a very high level. Hey, Division I, this is where we need to have that growth now. Or even our Division II NAIA programs. Like, it's so easy because all these girls come together from all over the country to compete at such an event. It makes it so much easier, I think, to present it to administration and to those that believe in the sport to get us to be able to grow at that level. When you have a little tournament, it doesn't say the same thing.
When we look at the opportunity as a woman to coach young women, to have experiences to give them that you may not always had growing up, what's that mean to you?
I don't even know if you can technically put that all into words. When I coach my athletes, I'm not coaching them obviously for just what we do on the mat. I'm like, man, we're going to be CEOs, we're going to be running companies, we're going to be, it's not like, hey, I think when you see a female in position of leadership, it allows these other young ladies to see that they can be in position of leadership. And so I think that is probably the biggest thing that they can get out of all this, is seeing these women in the corner, knowing that, wow, this young lady can be in power. Now that's what I can have. I can accomplish those things. And so I think that's one of the things I probably push the most with our young ladies is the skills that we earn and we now take them back to the workforce in the real world, and we just explode with what we're actually fully capable of, instead of being kind of in this little bubble or this little box where we think we can be.
There are always trailblazers and pioneers. There are groups like Sandy Baker and Tricia Saunders, that group, Afsoon Johnston. Then there's the group after that, the Jenny Wongs, the Sarah McMahon, Patricia Randers. Then there's your group that wrestled, the first group to win this tournament. And you were in high school when the announcement came that it was going to be an Olympic sport. So all these doors were opened in your, formative wrestling years as a teenager. And then now to look around at these girls that are teenagers in their formative wrestling years, to not have to experience that in terms of as a positive going, we've always known we're an Olympic sport. We've always known we're going to go to Fargo. What does it mean to you to see the growth of wrestling and women's wrestling go from we had to fight for this or we didn't have this opportunity and now it's standard operating procedure for us? I'm gonna
actually use my little sister as a great example. I have a little sister that just turned 11, and we ran a camp, and we all were going and talking about what got you into the sport of wrestling, and I think this was probably the best example of what this is. So the one girl's 19 or 18 years old, and she tells her story about I was a sophomore, nobody wrestled, or my story at that point you barely seen it at all, and then she's like, well, it was a sport, and I mean, it's just, why wouldn't I? She's like, I didn't have a story. So I think it's really cool to know that the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, they don't have the same stories that, some of us do, even your 19, 20, and 21-year-olds now, especially some of our older. So it's really nice to see that they have a space now and nobody's pushing them away. And I think that's probably the coolest thing is her story was so awesome that I'm so proud to know she doesn't have a story, as crazy as that sounds.
Let's talk about Melinda a little bit, because you both are here coaching, and she was big game hunting back then. She went down to challenge Mary Kelly, and Natasha Momoto was third at that weight. That was the dominant weight of that year based on credentials. And what do you remember about her performance? What do you remember about the overall finals experience? And the moment we arrived, but we're on that race platform, and there's oh wow, Melinda showed up and won. From for me, from my experience, Mary was my baseline, and opened my eyes to the worlds of women's wrestling. What was that moment like to you to watch those other women around you win titles, and especially in a high caliber match like Melinda and Mary Kelly?
I would say the really nice thing is women's wrestling was small at that time, so we had already traveled together, we had already been at the training center together, we had already been to championships together, and so although they hadn't, Melinda was working on chipping away, what we noticed is it's nice, you started to see the depth, right? So when you have this high-level athlete already and they're you're the standard, is finding those coaches and those athletes invested enough to be able to start chipping away to make those gains. But no, it was so electric, is the best way I can explain it. It was just electric in those moments to see the ones that were already number one and then ones that are clawing at it to now take over those championship spots. I would say overall, the finals, it's still what it is today. You work hard, you fight hard, and you grind as hard as you can in the practice room, and you come here, shake hands, and sometimes you know what's going to happen, sometimes you don't. But there's no better feeling than being on that stage and getting your hand raised at the end of this really long week. So,
what's been the best part about the growth of this tournament in the last 20 years?
I said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. It's depth. It's seeing the depth that I would say back when I wrestled, you knew your 1, 2, 3, and 4 were pretty much going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4, and maybe some shake up a little bit, but a number 10 wasn't coming in out of nowhere and winning the tournament. Where now, a number 12, it wouldn't be shocked if she runs through the tournament, ends up taking first in the long run. So I think for me, the depth, and I would say another thing is all the women in the corners. It's very exciting to see more and more women in the corners coaching these young ladies. Again, that's just, it gives them the opportunity to think there's so much more opportunity for them. So I would say those two are probably the biggest three things.
We're looking at the launch pad again, and we talked about college wrestling, but 30 of the world teamers, of the 10 world teamers on the women's side in Oslo last year, every single one of them wrestled in this tournament. What's that mean to you as a coach and a developmental coach to be hey, this is where it begins?
I think I would say probably the last 10 years, that is, for a long time, that is where it's been at, is if we can get these young ladies to come over to the college programs, they get the opportunity because they're wrestling freestyle the whole time. So they get that opportunity to be in a full-time freestyle wrestling room with a coach that has the opportunity to fully develop them and give them the opportunities to compete regularly as freestyle athletes, opposed to if they're on a boys team somewhere or back home still training. Sometimes it's really hard to still be able to get those opportunities to be on that freestyle mat at all times, because that's what it takes to get to that next level, is that constant training with your freestyle wrestler.